Hello, hello. How is my audience doing today? Happy Monday. We are so excited to have you here. We are here today to talk about automating your process with these amazing panelists sponsored by airSlate. But while we give people a few minutes to join in and join us here, can I do a quick icebreaker, Brian and Lee? Do you think
Oh,
you, yeah?
absolutely. Do
All
it,
right.
Eduardo.
Do you want a fun one? I know that Lee is a comedian. Do you want a fun one or do you want like a more mild one? What is the
What do
mood?
you,
Is the
what do you
fun one?
think, Elaine?
Yeah, I don't know. Mild. Is the funny one not mild? Let's do the funny one.
No,
Let's.
okay, let's
Let's
do
do
the
the funny
funny one.
one. Let's roll.
Yeah,
All
let's do
right.
it.
So, Brian, are hot
Yes.
dog sandwiches?
So,
Are hot dog sandwiches?
are hot dog sandwiches? No, no, they're not,
No,
Eduardo.
why not?
Uh, they're mystery meat. Who knows what's in them?
Right, yeah, okay, that's good. What about you, Lee? Do you think hot dogs are sandwiches?
I think yes, actually. Yeah, I think I was gonna say no, and then but my justification was the seam that keeps it together. It's not two separate pieces of bread. But
Hmm.
then I would definitely consider a sub a sandwich, and it's got
That
the
is,
same
And we got
circumstances.
our first controversy already. Lee and I
see?
are on
It's
opposite
already
ends.
already gotten heated.
Good
It's a
start
good
right
thing we
here.
have you here to moderate and set us straight. So what's the word, Eduardo?
Yes.
Yes. Audience, feel free to go in the chat and tell us if hot dogs are sandwiches or not. We'd love to hear from you. Let's start in here. Let me get my slides in line. So this event today is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they would struggle to solve on their own and to see around corners they might not know about. And we do that through great live sessions like this one you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum, and we also have quarterly summits. And we're starting to get back to in-person events. So if you're not already a part of MSP, you are missing out. But don't worry, you will be invited to join right after this event. As I said, we have quarterly summits, and we just had one in October, and it was amazing. Like the sessions were pretty good. I'm just gonna put a link right here in the chat for you to go ahead and check all the sessions. They're all available for you. You can watch it at any time. But that's enough about MSP. Today's event is sponsored by the team at airSlate, and I have the pleasure to have Brian here with me today. So Brian, can you tell us a little bit about airSlate?
Sure. Eduardo, thanks first so much for having me. I was lucky enough a couple weeks ago, I got to do a Power Hour with Pete, who's the founder of Modern Sales Pro, and that was a lot of fun. And now getting to be with you and Lee, really excited about doing this today. And this is, a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is automation. As a sales leader, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how I can help my team spend less time doing manual tasks and more time selling, more time connecting with people. And so that's what we do at airSlate. We're a document workflow automation company. And so basically we help you get your documents done in any way that you need. And what that allows, folks in RevOps like Lee and sellers to do is spend more time on high value tasks. So the less time you're entering things in or into a spreadsheet and then pulling that into your CRM system, but instead that you're talking to customers and uncovering value, that's a win for any sales organization. And that's part of what we do here at airSlate. So thanks so much for having me.
It sounds amazing. They're doing fantastic stuff. So please make sure to request a demo at the top of this page and check their website. I just put the link in the chat, and I also put the link for the Power Hour that Brian just mentioned. It was fantastic, Brian. You have so much knowledge to share. Thank you for being here. I'm pretty sure this event will also be amazing. So let's start. Let's do some housekeeping notes. Audience, this event is being recorded. We cannot just let all this knowledge go to the ether. So it's being recorded. It's going to be available in the MSP previous events page. And also, please let's use the Q&A and the chat. I was talking with my speakers backstage, and Brian was telling me he's feeling a little bit sad and he loves answering questions. And since it's Monday, let's make him feel happier and let's send him a lot of questions about automation. And Lee will also answer them. I need to let you know, audience, Lee is a comedian, so also you can ask him funny questions. He will love to answer all of those. So that's enough. Let's start this conversation. We are here today to talk about your ticket to boosting revenue, and that is automation. And we have this amazing panelist. Unfortunately, Brianna could not join us, so I will kick things off in here, saying that it's almost 2023, right? 2022 flew by, and as we reflect on a year of great change and volatility that was 2022, we should also think if we are prepared for the uncertainty that 2023 will bring. Findings from McKinsey Global Survey on Automation showed that the imperatives for automation success are shifting, which are not surprising, like the word is shifting. And 2 years ago, the survey found that making business process automation a strategic priority was conducive to success beyond the piloting stage. And this year, the findings shows that prioritizing automation has become even more important to enable success. They also suggest that successful organizations continue to focus on employees as much as technology, and that they have instituted new ways of doing so, um, in which employees work alongside with the new technologies. And finally, rethinking operation models, including how different functions work together, how has emerged as a new imperative. So we're talking about tech stack, how you make your tech stack work in your favor. However, on the other side of the story, many companies have failed to meet their targets for automation success. We are here today to discuss with the specialists how to successfully automate your business with the amazing Brian and Lee. So let's start from the beginning. Brian, why would a sales leader invest in automation, and like what are the benefits of automating their processes?
Yeah. First and foremost, it's to keep Lee and heads of RevOps happy, because I think they are the unsung superheroes of a sales organization. Is your head of RevOps, and you ask anyone in sales, and RevOps can be their best friend because they do so much. And I've got an amazing head of RevOps here, Samantha, who I worked with her twice previously and lucky enough to have her a third time. That was something Pete and I talked about. But, it all comes down to how can you have your sellers doing the things that are core? And right now, I will tell you, every CRO, every VP of sales that I'm talking to as we get ready for 2023, we're starting to see layoffs in tech and other areas. And so even people who are hiring are probably not doing it as aggressively as they thought they might be 3 or 4 months ago. And so everyone's trying to figure out, how do I do more with the same or less? How do I make people more productive? And automation is just kind of that low-hanging fruit. And when you think about things like, one of my favorite examples is Expensify from a expense report. There are a few things that salespeople hate more than doing expense reports, and being able to find ways to automate and streamline, and it gives time back. That's time that could be spent talking to customers and to going out there and finding new business. And by doing that, if you can give a sales team 20 or 25% more time, that's the equivalent of, instead of having to hire 20 or 25% more people. And I'd always much rather have a sales organization where I've got 10 people doing 150% than I've got 20 people each doing 75% or something like that. So what can we do to maximize the sales efforts and give time back to sellers? And I think automation, even in a tight economy when budgets are tightening up, if you're able to articulate, here's how I can help you do more, here's how you get a great return on your investment through automation, I think that you're going to find that there are customers who are absolutely looking for that and open to that conversation.
Awesome. That is a great answer. Lee, I will ask you to introduce yourself first. I went ahead of myself and didn't ask you to introduce, and then tell us like a little bit from your experience as RevOps manager. What are the benefits of automation?
Yeah, my name is Lee Vienup. I'm the RevOps manager at Airbase. I've been doing RevOps or some version of it with a sales ops. I know that's a big debate, but for the last 7-ish years, 8 years. And so as far as automation and how it relates to RevOps or why it's important, I think it's one of the most visible things that people can feel from the rep side as far as what RevOps is responsible for. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that happens with RevOps, but automation is one thing I think that reps tend to know is a RevOps function that they tend to appreciate the most. I do think it's often the stuff that they hate doing the most. Often some of it was generated in their perception by RevOps themselves, right? This need to populate a new field or this need to follow a new process. It usually does come down or look like it was generated by RevOps. And so to be able to then automate some of those asks back out of the process is one of those things that they can really tangibly feel on their side, right? Generating commissions, they see the effect, but not necessarily the work. Monitoring technical debt, same kind of thing. Running forecasting, similar, like, okay, are you helping or hurting here? You know what I mean? Whereas automation is pretty objectively always beneficial to them.
Yeah, so I guess, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say when it works.
Yeah.
That's the key.
That's the key.
To make it work, right? So I
Yeah.
guess what I'm hearing is automation, it's here to help companies save money and time, and also to help the reps to have like a full data visibility and like all the software integrations that they can have, right? One big problem touching this that we're talking about, one big problem that I keep on seeing in communities like MSP and others around is that people are paying a lot of attention to the tech stack and trying to make it more efficient and less costly. And we keep on seeing people saying like, if you're launching a product, it needs to be a must-have, not a nice to have. And I think automation, it's very connected to making things a must-have. So Lee, how can automation help companies reduce or manage their tech stack?
Yeah, I think increasingly when we're in vendor calls, the thing that we're hearing often is the word platform, right? Everybody's got a new platform, and it's every solution, every point solution tends to be itself a platform. And there's some benefits to that, right? But a lot of times I think what we're finding is that we're being sold a house when we need a sink. And so there's a lot of features in these things. They're very robust and actually well implemented. I think they can deliver a lot of ROI. A lot of teams aren't necessarily going to leverage all of that. And some of those features that they require can be sort of built in-house with some light customization, right? So I think really asking, what is it that we need from this platform? And is it something that we can currently automate leveraging an existing tool? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times the answer is yes, right? And you don't want to go for a full-on build over buy solution, right? That can get you mired in tech debt itself or maintenance. But I think if you really ask yourself, hey, what's going to move the needle? What do we really need from this? And can we build it in-house? Can we automate it? And does that then solve our problem, get us through to the next step, especially kind of with things as they currently are in the current environment? I think a lot of times the answer is yes. So.
Yeah. And Lee, one of the things our CMO, Sean, and I were talking about is, 2020, 2021 were the years of collaboration. Everyone's talking about collaboration, and you saw things like Slack and Zoom just absolutely take off. And the trend we're seeing is that it's a lot more about consolidation right now, that people are looking at their tech stack, trying to figure out how can I get more out of it? Or, I think the potential is, hey, can I have one tool instead of 3 tools? And that a lot of these things go underutilized. I'd love to hear kind of your perspective and what you're seeing from your end in terms of that and how that matches your reality or not.
Yeah, it strongly resonates with, I think, what we're doing right now, right? There was this pretty significant proliferation of tools, I think. And then now it's like, oh, are we really using that? Or how much of that are we using? And what part of it? And specifically, because if that's something that we can find in another one of these existing platforms, or again, something that we can just quickly spin up, or something that we can even build a quick MVP of that gets us through, is it really worth the spend? And I think, again, same thing. Oftentimes we're starting to see increasingly the answer is no, not right now anyway. So yeah, that's definitely something that resonates with what we're working on currently, is like going through each tool, finding the features, identifying what they are, seeing if they live in another system, and if they don't, again, we can quickly build it.
Yeah, and Lee, one of the things you mentioned cost. And we think about costs in multiple ways. There's the how much do I have to pay for the tool, but then there's the cost of like how much of your time does it take, Lee? How much of the team's time? Like that opportunity cost, what could you have been doing instead? And so I think, to buy a point solution that might be 20% better than what you have, is that really worth it when you weigh that against, okay, here's another system I have to support and roll out and train and do all of that. How are you thinking about that? And how does, what does that lens look like for you?
Yeah, I do think, especially, again, our team is not, given the current environment, our team is not about to scale up massively, right? We're not about to get a bunch of additional, administrative support. And so having additional tools where they've got their own ecosystem of automation or configuration, trying to fit that into the existing ecosystem of many different automations, many different configurations, it's starting to become a question of whether or not we even can do that. And if we want to do that, if it's practical, what other things, I know we've spoken about kind of, or briefly mentioned opportunity costs for reps, right? What could they be doing if not this? We have the same question in RevOps, right? Yeah. If we're completely mired in administration and configuration or maintaining automations from disparate systems, what could we have done that we haven't done? And that list becomes quite long. And I think when you start to see some significant needle moving projects on that list, it becomes apparent that something else needs to give.
You keep on mentioning the current economical state of how economy is now. Brian, can you tell us a little bit more how moving forward for 2023 in this unstable economy and how things are with inflation and probably a recession coming, how automation can help businesses keep afloat?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that there are a lot of people going into the workforce today who they haven't been through a tough economic time. I mean, if you started your career 10 years ago in 2022 or 2012, the last 10 years have been pretty strong. And yet, we had March of 2020, which everyone thought for a couple of weeks it was going to be, a global catastrophe. And then you saw money pumped into the system. And for a while, things were better than ever. And tech, you look at tech valuations and they all skyrocketed. And I think, a lot of what we did was kind of push the pain away for a couple of years. And now those bills are coming due. And so you're seeing inflation and things like that. And it's a fascinating economic environment in that you have really low unemployment still. And so a lot of companies are saying, hey, we're still having trouble finding people. And then you have this record inflation. And so if you do find someone, you've got to pay them a lot and things like that. And, automation to me is one of those things that is a key to that. And, a couple of examples I think about, I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And before the pandemic, when you would go across the Bay Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge, there was a toll taker. And so you would either, you had your fast track or you could pay. And during the pandemic, they eliminated those jobs. Those are gone completely. It's entirely automated now. Either you use fast track or they take a picture of your license plate and just bill you for that. And, to me, that's an example of automation, that those jobs aren't coming back. And so I think there's a lot that's inevitable around automation. And the smartest and strongest companies are looking at, hey, what can we automate that will free people up to do higher value tasks? How can we get more leverage out of these folks? And, if something's manual data entry, that's not adding a lot of value. And so those are the sorts of things that, over at Airbase and here at airSlate, we're really looking at and helping companies with is, what can we take off your plate? What can we automate for you to allow you to compete? And I think that the companies that do that most effectively over the next year or two, they're actually going to come out of this much, much stronger. And I think you're going to see, some new entries into some markets. And I think you're going to see some longtime players who either they're going to adapt and thrive, or they're going to have a tough time surviving. I think that's the sort of economy that we're looking at, that the winners are going to win big, and it's going to be really painful for those who do not adapt and figure out new ways to do business.
Yeah, we had a panel in the summit that I just put the link in the chat for people to watch the recording. And one of the panelists says, this is a great moment to start a business, right? So because it's very interesting, there is money flowing. What is the importance of adding automation at the beginning, at the early stages of your business. So if you're founding a business now, if you're creating your startup, what is the importance of having automation like built into the culture of the company?
Lee, I think that's such a great question from you, in terms of when you build it first, how do you think about automation and how do you think about scaling and what are those trade-offs?
Yeah, I think I built one instance myself, but I've largely inherited an instance. So I think sometimes you can see sort of the remnants of automation that was built early on, and sometimes I have to deal with the consequences of it later on. So I think if I think about building automations early on in a business, a lot of what it comes down to is, it sounds kind of like a bit boring of an answer, honestly, but good documentation, good taxonomy, a shared understanding of what it is that you're talking about when you're talking about these data points. I mean, ultimately, automation is about data orchestration, right? You're taking data and you're putting it into a new position. It's following some specific process. I think having that stuff well documented, having those definitions well defined early on will save you a ton of time, because sometimes the ask almost always comes through as, can you automate this? And the answer is almost always technically yes. But then when you actually get down to tax, it turns out, well, automate what? We don't even agree with what the process is. If we were going to do this as a person, how would we do it? You ask 10 people and get 10 answers. What does ACV mean, right? Are we all aligned on that? And does it mean the same thing to each person? And what's the ultimate, definition, so that when we produce it using this automation, that it's going to be the actual right answer. So I think that stuff is really critical early on. From there, I think the next best question is sort of what's valuable. You could automate things. I think honestly, your RevOps team will be happy to help you automate things all day just because it's fun. But it's really important to consider what needs to be automated, what will most move the needle, what will most free up time for the reps to do something valuable, and not just what could we automate, right? Because there is a cost to having a ton of automations. They do, if they're not well monitored, they build technical debt, they require maintenance. Mm-hmm. And there is just a finite amount of time, right? So I think especially early on, considering what we should automate is a really critical question.
Man, I think Lee just hit on so many good points there. And one of those is, if you automate a bad process, eventually you have to go back and you have to undo that. And, my background is typically I work at early stage companies and help scale. And one of the things we try to be really thoughtful about is, what we're going to automate, because to Lee's point, hey, you could automate just about anything, but there are trade-offs. And, it's one of those things I always caution people, especially if they've got a background at larger companies and they come to an earlier stage company, that, I think it's easy to sometimes be judgmental and say, why don't you have that automated? Why aren't you doing it this way? And it's, the tyranny of the urgent, that at the time, hey, we could have automated that and it would have taken 6 months and we would have been out of business. And so instead, here's what we did. And I just think you have these continual choices of looking at, hey, we could go back and undo that and automate it now, but what's the cost of doing that? And, how far does it take us?
Okay, so talking about failures, do you have any horror stories, Brian, that you can share about airSlate or any companies that you worked before, or horror stories for automation when things went sideways?
Man, I'll of course not with airSlate, but I will totally date myself with. So I started my sales career at Oracle, and Tom Siebel had built the Oracle CRM. It was called Oasis. And, I was so excited to go work at Oracle, second largest software company in the world. And I showed up on my first day and they gave us this cardboard cutout that was to match your computer keyboard, because Oasis was this, shift F7. And so you had to hit these keys in order to save things. It was this black and white screen that looked like, the airlines use when they type 97 things. And so it was like this terminal. And they warned us hey, you only get one of these and it's kind of a big deal to get this cardboard cutout. So don't lose it. And, I started using that thing and I grew to it became second nature. I didn't really need it. Just I had everything memorized. And so, shift F9 and save things. And then Oracle rolled out their Oracle CRM, and at first, everyone was like, oh, this is going to be great, and looked at it. And it was incredibly slow. It was just, it was really painful. And so everyone stayed on Oasis and was using their punch cards and things like that. And eventually Oracle had to, like, they just shut off access to that Oasis system and forced everyone over to use it. And there was such an outcry because people would literally just be sitting there and they had to roll it back. So that was this instance of like, beautiful GUI interface, everything's going to be shiny and new, and it didn't quite work. And I'm also, one of the things I'm really adamant about is I stick with Salesforce Classic. I'm just not a Lightning fan. And, so I always joke they're going to have to drag Salesforce Classic out of my cold, dead hands. So I don't know, Lee, what?
I was going to say, we're back to the hot dogs here because all the way. But I can appreciate it. I learned on Classic and then switched to Lightning early before it got too ingrained. But I definitely understand the sentiment. We have users who are in the same boat, so I get it.
It's not just me. Okay.
It's not just you. It's not just you. We'll get you all eventually, though.
I know. I dread I know it's coming, the day that it's like the end of life and everyone's moving over. So I always tell people that's my goal, that I'm going to retire before that. So
the last one standing.
Yeah. So how about you, Lee? Is there stuff over there that you've tried to roll out automation or seen it elsewhere in the career where you had to roll it back?
We did have a thing we had to roll back. So I think a lot of times we talk about automation horror stories. I think there's always this. Every time I have the fear that we turn something on and it just does the thing a million times incorrectly, right? Like very quickly produces a lot of very bad problems. And I think that's everybody's kind of healthy fear of automation. I don't think I've had that happen that I can remember, I think I would. There was this one thing, and it sounds very small in comparison, but when I got here, we'd had, again, sometimes you see solutions where you're like, this is actually quite crafty. I would have solved the problem for that day. But now we pay the consequences later. We had an automation that stamped an opportunity reference at the account level. And then it would look, there were formula fields that would reference that opportunity and populate for things like ACV or contract renewal date or whatever. And so we found out one time that all the contract renewal dates were wrong. So they were all in the wrong month. The CS team didn't know when things were coming. We're like, okay, I was new and I was like, oh, it should be no problem. This is like a 5-minute job. I'll get the data loader out. I'll pull a CSV. I'll find the actual contract end dates. We'll fix this. It's no big deal. And then we'll go and figure out what happened with the automation. It should be no problem. But you can't change formula fields. You can't overwrite them. And so in order to fix this thing, and I told people too, I was like, should be 10 minutes. I'm new, no big deal. I'll sort this right out. And it was like a 4-week project. It was like we had to roll it back. There were so many things that had built on top of that contract date that we had to roll a bunch of other things back. And there was no choice. We couldn't change it. So it had to be migrated or completely updated. So the entire architecture was compromised by this one small automation decision from a long time back. So
Eduardo, these are the reasons. These are the dangers. You need someone like Lee who's thoughtful and who also has the rewind button and can fix things. I had another example, which was previous company. We had an outside recruiter and we were looking to hire some more SDRs. I love SDRs, and I think it's the lifeblood of a sales organization. So we wanted to get some great SDRs in there. And I was presented with, there's this tool that'll do automated outreach on LinkedIn. And we just need access to your LinkedIn account. And I was like, I don't know. Like I'm pretty near and dear to my LinkedIn, but I said, okay, I'll do it. Great automated tool. Well, whatever they had set up, they then started sending out meeting requests, and the targeting was way off. And so I was getting responses from like VPs of sales and CROs and enterprise AEs who are like, have you even bothered to look at my background? No, I'm not interested in becoming an SDR. And it was going out in my name, and I was just like, oh. So that was when I couldn't easily roll it back. I just had to send a lot of, apologetic and I'm profusely embarrassed emails in response.
Well, that's good. At least you found a solution.
Yeah. So hey, there are lots of great things about automation, but you got to be careful and you got to be thoughtful with it.
Right. Let's change gears a little bit. I have a question here. Can you talk about automated contracts or invoices directly from Salesforce? How are people currently doing this? I'll throw this question to Lee.
To be honest, we're not currently doing this. This is a thing that's on our roadmap as far as like, hey, we need to figure this out. It also sort of supports us in the like deal desk, right? So we want to be able to review things. We want that data to be structured, and then we want it to match exactly what's in the invoices, exactly what's in the contracts, tie it back to our GL. So we're just starting to kind of scope that out right now. We're trying to leverage some stuff out of the box, but finding it to be pretty limited. So the next step is kind of, all right, what solutions are out there? And that means getting legal involved. It means getting finance involved. It means, again, kind of aligning on the definitions of things, making sure that we understand what they need when they think of this process, right? How are they invoicing? How are they sending contracts? How are they doing redlining? And so that's kind of the stage that we're at right now, is just talking to all the stakeholders and going through the flow charting piece, right? What does this actually even look like when it looks right? So,
Lee, I got you, man. I got you on this. So
yeah.
So my background, I spent 5 years at HelloSign until I was there through the acquisition by Dropbox. And Lee can attest, there's some great Dropboxers over at his current company over at Airbase now. But and we have our e-signature tool here at airSlate, Sign Now. And from my standpoint, hey, e-signature is great, made life a lot better for sales reps. I can send out a contract and get it back. And most salespeople, like once they get the contract signed, they're like, hey, we're good, right? But it's Lee and everyone else who has to make sure, especially in the SaaS world, hey, there's a whole lot more that happens. One, before that document gets created, like where do you pull that information? And do you want someone manually entering it? And then once it comes to you that, hey, now we've got a contract, who's going to let finance know so we can bill them properly? Who's going to, a lot of times people are running Salesforce for their CRM, and then they're running NetSuite or something else for ERP. How do you move things from that system? Hey, it's a great idea. Once you sign a customer, let's get them provisioned. Let's let customer success know, and not have a customer who's signed up and now they're waiting a couple months. So all of those things can be automated, and we're finding a ton of value. And it's kind of fun because we're doing it here ourselves. When you sell a product that is really well geared for sales and sales ops, and you can use it for your own team, that's a lot of fun. And so that's part of what we're seeing here at airSlate, is automating that entire process and just not settling for the solution of, hey, I can send a document out and I get it signed. Like, that's great, but that's really an inflection point, and it's not actually a workflow. And figuring out, how do you automate an entire workflow?
That's good.
That's
It's
cool.
about
Leave we can talk more later.
Yeah, we definitely. It's funny, even as you're saying it, I often find myself in this sort of like GTM blindness, where I'm like, oh, this is pretty much marketing and sales, right? That's the whole company. And it's like, once the contract is signed, then the other 80% of the org can start doing their, you know what I mean? Like, there's a whole month, there's so many things that happen once the contract is signed.
Well, Lee, you can click the request a demo button right on the top of this page, and then there's Lee team will get in touch. We have a question from Matthew. Matthew is asking, at what point have you found it to be necessary to implement a solution like a CPQ? What were your drivers, and what did you look for in a solution? So let's talk with Brian.
Yeah. So, and I'll give a quick answer, but then I'd love to hear from Lee. And I think, CPQ it's a complex thing to bring in, and there's a lot entailed in it. And there are definitely trade-offs of, what are you going to gain from it? And then what's required to build it, to maintain it, to keep it updated and current. And so we've actually used our own tools. It's kind of a lightweight CPQ to do like DocGen and things like that. Because for us at this point, and so it's, I mentioned Samantha, it's definitely something on her radar for down the road, but we are just not at a stage where we thought there was enough value in it in return for what it was going to do for us. So instead, we've used airSlate as our own lightweight CPQ. And so that's what we're seeing. But Lee might be a little further along, so I'd love to hear his thoughts.
No, I am actually feeling quite validated by that answer, because I'm like, cool, that's basically what our approach as well. I think I had initially, when CPQ had come up, had taken it for granted, like a thing that we were definitely, of course, going to get, and that may still be the case, but it's really expensive. It's really expensive. It's really, really time consuming to implement. It's no joke. You have to have already pretty well defined processes, a good understanding of your SKUs, your entire process. I mean, a lot of it, I think people don't quite realize. It's definitely not like a set it and forget it, right? It's almost as big of a solution as Salesforce itself or Marketo. In some instances, like a lot of people will have somebody fully just as an administrator for CPQ, depending on the org, sometimes many, right? So it's, for us, kind of been the same thing where we've talked about it. We recognize that there are some things that it would solve, but kind of similar to what I mentioned earlier, it's one of those where, is right now in the current environment the best time to implement a CPQ, or is right now a good time to try and evaluate what it is that you actually require from a CPQ and see which parts you can automate or buy sort of a point solution that can, a lightweight kind of version, as Brian mentioned, to get you through. I think a lot of folks can actually. And that's what we've been finding here. So even as we've got it on our radar as a thing that we should constantly ask ourselves, is it time for CPQ? But more often than not, the answer is pretty resoundingly not now. We can use this solution plus some flows plus a little bit of process change with the reps to get by for now. So.
And I think one great point that Lee just made there was, whenever you're looking at automation or looking at some new technology that you're looking at bringing in, it's just a great time to evaluate why you're doing the current processes. And just because, like, hey, this is why we've always done it this way, so let's automate it. But taking a step back and having that view of like, well, why are we doing it this way? What is the business outcome that we're working towards here? And does it still make sense? And instead, there may be a different and more efficient way to do what you've been doing. And so before you kind of encapsulate, set in stone that current process, taking the time up front to figure out, hey, what do we truly want to be doing and what would be the best way? It's a really good time to evaluate that before you actually launch the project. And then you're now you're kind of locked in.
Yeah, and to that end, I think even just that process, sometimes you'll find CPQ isn't even the bottleneck, right? There's an internal process friction that there's no real resolution to it at the moment, or it's not a priority for another team. Implementing CPQ wouldn't fix that, right? So I think you're dead on with that. Just going through that process alone can be extremely valuable.
Awesome. I want to change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about success. How do we define that an automation is successful, and how do you define the process on getting it like an automation ready to go? And let me start with Lee. Like, how do you define success?
As far as defining success of automation?
Yes.
So a thing that we do pretty often here is as problems come up, right? This is a big RevOps generally, is just problems. They often come to RevOps, which is a good thing, right? Because then you can start to aggregate them, see what the trends are, understand where it is that there's commonality, and then identify what's really going wrong. A thing that we often do here is build out dashboards to try and identify where those specific issues are coming up, where it's possible, or even just reports to kind of casually keep an eye on. Great. This is how we're able to, using the data, using structured data, tell when something that wasn't supposed to happen happened. And so we'll often use that as a basis for building automations and as a way to, in a quantitative way, determine if something has actually been improved or fixed. So routing errors is a good example. So leads that don't go where they're supposed to go. We kind of start to figure out what do those look like, or why did they go wrong, and then build dashboards. And then when I hit refresh and the whole thing says 0, that's when I know that we're doing very well. So that's a quantitative way. To be honest, a lot of these things are such a pain point in the first place that the anecdotal evidence is usually pretty compelling. When you really fix a problem with automation, like people will tell you. So besides being able to see it in the data, you often get the feedback pretty significantly that something is improved.
What do you say, Brian? How do you define like success for the success of an automation?
Yeah, so this is something we've built into our sales process here at airSlate. And so we use, as a sales methodology, we use MEDDIC, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. And the the M in medic is for metric. And so this is one of the things that our account execs really spend a lot of time on, is making sure that when we're engaged with customer, hey, how can we help you measure success? So, when Lee goes to Philippe, the CRO over there, and says, hey, I think we should do this project, 6 months from now, how do we measure that success? And how do we set Lee up to be able to go over to Philippe and say, hey, Philippe, here, look at the success we had. Here's why you should promote me and pay me more. That we want to make sure that they're set up for success in that way. And then it's also a great part of our handoff from our sales team over to our customer success team. And so our head of customer success, Michaela Powell, she's done a great job of really placing an emphasis on, hey, what are the business outcomes that this customer is looking for? And what are the workflow goals? So what are they trying to accomplish here? And just making sure that that's tangible up front. And then, frankly, as experts in e-signature and document workflow, we should be able to bring more to the table and help customers uncover more than what they are originally thinking about, and share, hey, here are other customers I've worked with, and here are the sorts of benefits they've thought about. You mentioned one or two, but have you thought about, how much more quickly you can get contracts signed and what that would mean for cash flow? What are some additional things? And hey, if instead of, you send out contracts and right now 70% of them come back, if we got that up to 85 by doing automation, what would that mean for the business? And have you calculated the value of that and what that can mean for the top and bottom line? And so I think that, it's a great partnership between the vendor and the buyer, and making sure you're having those conversations. And if you're not aligned, if you don't understand that, I think that's a huge red flag for any selling organization, that, taking the time to make sure that your customer is going to be set up for success. Because, going back to, I was telling you about Tom Siebel, who obviously went and created Siebel Systems. And, the vendors of the past, they selling these massive like ERP and CRM systems before there was SaaS, they were notorious for it. They had a term for it called shelfware. You would sell someone something and it would sit there, and you didn't really care if it got implemented or not, because you got a big upfront payment, things like that. And the SaaS world is so different, that you have to compete for your customers every single day, because the lifeblood of any SaaS organization is keeping customers, the net revenue retention. And so if you're not setting your customers up to be successful, they're not going to renew with you, and your business is going to have a really hard time growing. Those are the most successful SaaS companies, where they see great revenue retention and expansion with their customers, because they're focusing on those very things, Eduardo.
Awesome. So you're talking about like metrics and workflows and how to sync up all the teams and departments in your company, right? Do you have any tips for the audience on how to automate those workflows to make handoffs and the success of your client to be more automated and more successful?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things we've started to do, just as a small example, so we use our own airSlate tool. Amy Volas, who's on LinkedIn, she's amazing. She wrote an article one time talking about how frustrating it was for her to have a call with, I think she described it as a adorable SDR, to talk to this SDR and give them all this information and things. And they're like, okay, great. And now I'm going to get you set up with my AE. And so then she hops on a call with an AE, and the AE is like, great, so what are you looking to do? And basically everything Amy had given to this person had just been gone, forgotten. And, now it was just an incredibly frustrating experience for her. And that actually got me thinking. And so one of the things we do, we have this, we call it our customer needs analysis form. And anytime one of our SDRs is talking with a customer, if they're on Zoom, they pop it open. They click one button in Salesforce and it pulls some information. It pulls the name of the company, customer's name, customer's email address right into a airSlate form. And we show this and we ask them some questions. Like, we don't make it a mystery. Hey, I'm trying to understand, what workflows are you trying to automate? What sort of volume are you looking at? How large is your company? Because that's going to dictate, part of the solution and who I should have you talk to next. And we actually pull this form up and we share it with the customer. And when we're done, what we do is say to the customer, hey, I'm going to send this over to you, as well as I'm going to send it to your account executive, Kaylin. And, you're going to talk with her later today. But in the interim, I'm going to send you this form. And if I missed anything or I got anything wrong, go ahead and edit it. And what it's going to do, it's going to write back to, we use Salesforce, and it's going to write back into Salesforce. It's going to update the notes for Kaylin, and then she'll be prepared for any questions you might have. And we're starting to do this as well with, we use mutual action plans, where we just like to sit down with a customer and say, here's what we're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Here's our timeline in order to make you successful, and using that as well. So those are just some of the examples of what we've done internally to help automate those handoffs and those flows.
It sounds fantastic, especially with the workforce becoming even more remote after the pandemic, and those tools can help a lot with those handoffs, right? Because before you could just like get out of your cubicle and be like, hey, can you tell me a little bit about this? And now those automation can help with those handoffs. Lee, do you have anything to add in there? That how to automate workflows and how it's good for a company's health?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the how-to, and I feel like I might be beating a bit of a dead horse here, but I think a good flow chart, right? Good documentation. I feel like that's one of the things that I've most been implementing that I feel like moves the needle quickest as far as getting sound automation implemented. I made the mistake of showing somebody a Salesforce flow one time, thinking that was the same, right? And trying to walk them through. That's not effective, right? But if you can get the right stakeholders into the room and show them a flow chart very quickly, I find that people will be like, actually, this isn't quite, that's not actually how that's supposed to be, or this should go to a different person, or this team also needs to be included here. And you can iterate very quickly without spending a lot of time in development. And then also, as you're doing that, right, you're also building the documentation. So it's a twofold benefit. And in my experience, that is an invaluable step, and taking that step allows you to automate a lot of things very quickly. It also builds a lot of trust in the team that the automation is going to work, which is pretty critical. People can be very apprehensive about automation. So including them in the process, making sure that they feel like they can trust it, that they've had input, they can see what it's going to do when X happens or when Y happens, I think it's pretty critical.
And Lee, how about from a company standpoint in terms of Airbase, what sort of things do they help automate?
We do a lot of things with flows. So we do a lot of, we leverage a tool to do like account matching for leads. We don't use leads, we just use contacts. We push a lot of details from opportunities to accounts. We do some like calculation of what the ACV is based on whether or not something's an upgrade, like mid-cycle or
Lee, I'm trying to get you to give a sales pitch for your company. What?
What is Airbase itself automating?
Yeah, I don't want you getting in trouble with Philippe and Yako. We got all these great.
I think you're talking about what are we managing internally. Yeah, actually, that is one of the things I like about working here. This is one of the places I've worked where I'm like, that should exist. I really think that makes a lot of sense, because it does have a lot of. It's like a spend management platform. It's for managing automation for accounts payable, and it does have a lot of these sort of similarities around the things that we often automate in RevOps, right? There's a lot of automation for sales and for marketing, and that makes a lot of sense. Finance, actually, I was very surprised to find out it does not have that same ecosystem, and so Airbase is kind of trying to close that gap. So
yep. I think you guys are so well positioned, because companies aren't stopping spending, but they are going to be a lot more conscious about spending and tracking spend and seeing what's going on there. So I think you're incredibly well positioned as companies are thinking about that in 2023.
Yeah. And I think having that real-time visibility, especially how quickly things are moving, right? Being able to see how much money do we have, right? I did not realize that was a process that often companies don't have that answer until a month after. And that to me is astounding, right? I mean, in sales, that would be so, we couldn't allow it, right? We need that data immediately. We need it by the forecast meeting, right? So to find out that was not the case in finance previously, that was a shock to me. So.
Awesome. We have 10 minutes left, so I will ask Brian and Lee for key takeaways. What are like 3 things, Brian, that you want the audience to walk away today knowing about automation and why automation is important for them?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, just that a tough economic environment doesn't mean there aren't a lot of opportunities. Eduardo, you touched on it earlier. Like in many ways, hey, it's a great time to start a company. It's a great time to think about, for an existing company, how do you position what your value prop is, and how are you helping your customers? So I still think there is a ton of opportunity. Two, I think that the most successful companies are the ones that are looking to thoughtfully automate as much as possible, and to figure out, hey, how can we have people spending time on higher value tasks? What are things that we can automate to free up time so that we, in a time of high inflation and still really low unemployment, how do we free people up to do more? And then the third thing is, I think something Lee's hit on really, really well today is just being thoughtful about automation beforehand and doing the planning, mapping things out, questioning it, having the end in mind before you begin, and just being thoughtful and documenting things well. That's part of the key to success in automating things. So those would be my three.
Awesome, thank you. Those are fantastic. What about you, Lee?
Yeah, those are good three.
Well, now you need to come up with.
Sorry, man.
Curse is going second. I think for me, obviously, process documentation, taxonomy. I think those are they don't necessarily, I think, always come up when we're talking about automation. It's really just this like getting rid of menial or time consuming tasks. But I think it provides a forcing function, right, to that. What are we actually trying to do, and do we all agree to that? I think that's really key. I think the second thing is that outside of just the benefit of saving a lot of time, right, automation is really critical in terms of providing valuable, clean data. That's increasingly important right now, right? As leadership is trying to make decisions, pretty significant decisions right now, and being able to, one, have that data, and two, trust it. That's a place where automation can really help. And three, I think Brian also really hit on this pretty well, but just the ability to give your reps, or the people that you're automating for, it's not always exactly the sales reps, but anybody that you're automating for, surely they were hired because they're very good at what they do, right? And that is rarely was that quality administrative work, menial, repetitive administrative work, right? So getting that out of their workload and allowing them that time back to do whatever that valuable thing is extremely valuable, right?
I've never been hired for any job for my administrative abilities. So 100% Lee, 100%.
Well, this is fantastic. It sounds like automation is really the answer for the future, is your ticket to boost revenue, because you're not only saving time and money for your company, you are also keeping your reps accountable with their actions, and providing the data, the visual data that leadership needs to make decisions. And in this fluctuating economy that we are living, it sounds like automation is really the key to keep companies afloat, right? Awesome. So we are going to wrap things up in here. But first, I want to thank you, the audience, for attending and for the questions. We love having you here. Thank you for the questions. I think Brian and Lee are pretty happy with the questions that you sent. And also thank you to our sponsor for today, airSlate. Again, there is a request a demo button right at the top of this page. So request a demo and see what they're up to. They're doing amazing things. And as we said, they will help you next year keep afloat. Thank you, Brian and Lee, for providing this great content. And audience, the recording and key takeaways from today will be available shortly in the MSP web previous event page. We'll be able to access the recording, and I will also send you a follow-up email. And I hope to see you in another event. Let me pass the mic to my speakers so they can say goodbye and last words. So, Brian.
Sure. So Eduardo, huge thank you to you for having us. It's been a great conversation. You did a fantastic job of moderating. So thank you for that. And two, I would just, I want to take a minute to just kind of endorse Modern Sales Pro. I think that it's indispensable for any sales professional. And so, the emails, and it's the first place I go, and it's the first place. I mentioned Samantha, my head of RevOps. Like whenever we're like looking at a new vendor or considering something, the first place we go is to take a look on Modern Sales Pros and see what other really smart people have already done, because I'm someone who, if other people can do a whole lot of legwork for me, I always want to utilize that. And I just think the discussion topics, events like this, the in-person ones, which, man, it is so nice being back in person and seeing people again and things like that. But just Modern Sales Pros does such a great job. So thank you for everything you're doing there. And then last of all, I just want to say, Lee, hey, so much fun doing this with you. And so I really appreciate it. And I'll leave it to you to bring us home.
Thank you so much, Brian. I will pass it to my marketing team. We can start marketing MSP as the automation tool for sales leaders, right?
There you go.
First stop. Lee,
Take a screen grab.
last words.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Brian more. Eduardo, thank you so much for moderating. This is a lot of fun for me personally. I love talking about this stuff. I could do it all day. In fact, if I don't stop myself, sometimes that is the case, right? I can pretend it's work, but only to an extent. And also, really, couldn't agree with Brian more as far as Modern Sales Pros being my kind of go-to resource. In fact, a lot of the stuff I'm saying right now is just an amalgam of things that I've learned over the years of reading these Modern Sales Pros emails. It's actually kind of a burden. I try to go inbox zero, but these are the only ones that I have to leave until I read them. And so I'm like, oh, I got to go back and read. I can't get rid of this until I actually read it. It's always somehow in almost like a witchcraft way relevant to the topic that we're dealing with at Airbase right at that moment. I'm often screen grabbing it and sending it to my boss and being like, hey, you see, this is what we're talking about. So extremely relevant. And then, yeah, also really just appreciated being here with Brian. I think he was helping me look good when I was faltering. So really appreciate the help there.
Thank you so much, guys. I just put both Brian and Lee's LinkedIn in the chat, so audience, go ahead and connect with them so you can talk more about automation and learn about their companies and what they're up to. All right, so speakers, we can go hang out backstage, and while we hang out backstage, the Modern Sales Pros team will make sure that the recordings and key takeaways are available for you, audience, so we can go. Bye, audience. We will see you in the next one.